Good morning, guys. I hope everyone is on the chat. It's good to see you all this morning. Good to be here. Let me get the chat on the screen. Come alive. It's good to see you. I hope you're doing well. I know we had some prayers lifted for you this week. It's good to have you. Northbound, good to have you. Good morning. B. Nichols, good morning. Stasia. Stasia, good morning. Rick Bowser, Lindsay, good morning, guys. I'm off to a bad start already. I'm stuttering. I'm saying people's names wrong. C. Jones, good morning. Northbound, you can tell from the background on my video this morning that your topic of the North Pole is in play. So be thinking about if there's any context you want to give me before we start that. I probably will need some before we get started to know where you want to go with it. Good morning, Cornelius. Good to see you. Good morning. Yeah, I was trying to prep all my notes this morning. We did have a couple topics. I'll go ahead and put topics on the screen so you guys can start to think about what you might want to talk about. Again, do not be deterred by the topics you see because I think some of these will actually not be done today. So it's not a big deal, but all right. So let me show my topics here. There we go. Get the other things hidden for now, but there's our topics for today so far. Just a couple, well, actually a few from last week, but so we have Northbound Believer, your thoughts on the North Pole, and I would like, again, some context. April, good morning. It's good to have you. Yes, I'm doing okay this morning. I'm doing great. And then Rafa Sieber brought up a couple topics last week. One was the CIA and the book of Adam and Eve. And there's a lot to that. We're going to talk through what he meant by that, because I think that's probably something most people don't know much about, but we will go through that topic. It's pretty cool, actually. This is one of those things that you might come away going, wow, I didn't know that existed. Interesting. And then future topics, I've still pushed off Like an Eagles asking about the Chosen series about Jesus, and I have not watched it yet. My week was unexpectedly deterred by family events, and so I had to take a rain check on that. I couldn't watch any of the Chosen series. I couldn't really study much at all for anything because we had a lot of family things going on. And then Rafa Sieber's last topic of why did God tell Israel to kill women and children? And I think I may address this one very briefly. Let's see. I think I'll change how I have this. I'm going to address it briefly at the beginning. It's just going to be really short because I actually have a video on this topic specifically. So I don't want to go over everything in that video, nor do I remember everything in the video, honestly. And I didn't have time to get all my notes back together. But we'll talk about that very briefly and then move to these other two. And that's what I had from last week. So now I'm seeing in your chat here. First of all, Come Alive, you say you began chemotherapy yesterday. Power to you, brother. Stay strong. Make sure you support your body with good food and good things. Not reduce all the inflammation that you can. So no sugars and very few carbs. Stick to vegetables, acidic foods, and that will help the whole process. I'll be praying for you on that. But to look here, C. Jones, you say, I'm not Gnostic, but I do have a question. And let's see, I'll put the chat back on the screen. So it shows you're saying, I have a question on something I'd like your take on. It's something I'm trying to wrap my mind around. How does God both dwell in thick darkness and live in unapproachable light? I'm assuming that's straight out of a Gnostic text, and I don't know which one. But that's an interesting concept. I would imagine that has to do with the ineffable God, the all the different flamboyant things they say about God in the Gnostic texts, and how they describe him. You say it's from Scripture, and I must be totally missing the ball on that. So tell me which Scripture, and we will check it out. Maybe that's the topic. Maybe that's the topic, is the Scripture that comes from. So give me the verse, and we'll do that. Let's see here. Cornelius, you've got a question. The type of cross of the crucifixion: Orthodox, Catholic, JW, X cross, etc. I like that. That's interesting. I have heard some about that before. Haven't really studied it. Let's see. I'll put that on here as a topic. Let's see. What type of cross was it? All right. I've got that on my topics, Cornelius. And let's see. Let me keep up with the comments as it's going on here. Viewpoint on divorce and remarriage. Oh man, the interpreter Stephen Capaldo. Thank you for joining this morning. I will put this on our topic list for sure. You know, there's actually a few topics related to marriage and I guess you'd call it courtship, sexuality, that I think are really important to people to hear, and I really want to do some of those topics. They're just so awkward. So it's like, yeah, this is a good one. This is a good one. Stephen Capaldo, that's quite a name. Are you actually an interpreter? I'd like to know. It's pretty cool. Let's see. What else? Just checking up on your... Cornelius, you say polygamy? Oh man, I don't want to do that. Polygamy. It's on the list though. I'll probably push that off. And I've talked about polygamy before, and I just don't... it's a hard topic. I think I've come to the conclusion that polygamy is just not something that should be practiced. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but you know, that would take a while to explain. It may be something we can go into in a future, but I have it on the list, so just so you know. C. Jones, you gave me your verses for your question about God, and let me make sure I get that on my list here. I think I may push this one up towards the top of the list. I do like this topic, C. Jones. I want to do this. So C. Jones on that one. And your verses are 1 Timothy, Psalms, and Kings. 1 Kings. So let me put that on there. So now you can see from my screen now that we have all those topics on there. Francis Howard, good morning, sir. Judy Berry, good morning. It's good to see you. Francis Howard, you say good morning, and in John chapter 4, am I right in believing we are no longer tied to one specific place of worship? Ah, I like this. I like this topic. Thank you, Francis. We may dive into that one too. Woo, there's a lot coming on this list now. A lot. Let's see here. That is Francis Howard. Thank you again for joining this morning. Yeah, I like that topic. I'd like to look into that one. And Cornelius, you'll notice I let the cross of crucifixion bump a little, and that's because, I do these kinds of things for a lot of different reasons. Like, I pick the order. Some of it's because, like, I may feel like I know a little less about the types of crosses. And so I may let that get bumped for things I do know more about and can actually speak to, because then maybe if it goes to next week, I have a lot more information I can give you. So just know that, I don't ever base the order of these things on like who you are or any of that. Some of it simply has to do with timing and how I'll be able to get to something and if I have enough information. So I just wanted to mention that to everybody, because there's a lot of good topics on here now for today. Northbound, you like the backdrop? Yeah, you guys like the backdrop. It's a good backdrop. So this is a map from Mercator. Can't really remember Mercator's first name. Was it James or something? But he was a cartographer, and this is from 1569. So 16th century. Yeah, it's an old map that shows, by the way, let's see if I can point to it. It shows the Arctic Circle, and it shows this island, if you will, with a huge mountain or rock in the middle of it, which no one today knows or will tell us what it is. Pretty interesting, huh? It's so much fun. So much fun. Actually, I think I'm misinterpreting that. I think actually, like where my finger is now are land masses. And I think these are small tributaries that go through these land masses, and that the North Pole is in the middle of a sea, and that there is a huge mountain coming out of the sea at the North Pole. I believe that's what we're seeing on this map. Actually, I changed the colors on it just for, artistic effect. But let me see if I'll push it back to its original color. There. So yeah, like I was saying, it's land masses around an Arctic sea with a huge stone or mountain coming out of that sea at the North Pole. So, yep, nobody knows what that is now or can explain it to us. But there we go. Squiffy Bear, good to have you this morning, ma'am. Thank you for joining us. Let's see here. What else we got? Laura Masood, I'm so glad you're here this morning. Good to see you again. Your topic there, does God judge a people by their city? It seems to show this. Ooh, that's a good one, Laura. I like that. Oh, man. You guys, there's too much now. It's too much. Whew, man. Okay. I think we should start. I'm going to curate these topics real quick, and then we will order them, and we'll get started. Verum Venomous, good to have you this morning. I think this is the second time I've seen you. I could be wrong, but it's good to have you back. All right. So let me pop the chat and the screen. I'll show you as I'm trying to organize these a little bit. I do want to speak to this. Why does God tell Israel to kill women and children? Rafa brought up last week. I'll do that very briefly. Then Northbound, did you get me any more information on the North Pole? Because without any more information, I'm going to have trouble knowing what we want to talk about on that. Just want to make sure that I approach it properly, because I don't have a ton of thoughts on the North Pole other than things like the map we're looking at behind me. Then Rafa Sieber, I am going to do this, the CIA and the Book of Adam and Eve. And then let's see. C. Jones, we will go through these verses for sure on God and his dwelling place. Then Francis Howard, no longer tied to a specific place of worship in John 4. I think that'll be pretty easy to do. We'll go through that together. I think that'll be good. And then what I want to do is probably end up with, I want to end up on divorce and remarriage today. And then I think what we'll do is Cornelius, your cross of crucifixion. And then judging people by their city, Laura, and polygamy, we're going to bump those for now to the future. And I think we'll be in good shape for today. That's a lot even for today. Northbound, so you said my thoughts based on my own research and what I think is up there. Okay. All right. We'll do our best. I'll give you my thoughts. I always have thoughts. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for joining. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first topic. And this is from Rafa Sieber last week. And it is, why would God be so mean and tell Joshua and the Israelites to kill women and children? And yes, April, I do see your question about smart cities. I'll put it on here. It's probably for next week. Thank you for that. But Rafa and everyone in general, so about God killing women and children, the reality is that this is a perspective, and it's a thing that the Old Testament is full of these wars, the wars of the Jews, where God had brought the Jews out of Egypt. There was this amazing time period in the wilderness where he was taking them to the promised land, right? And of course, the promised land being Canaan, what we know as Canaan, and it was inhabited by all these different people groups, okay? The Jebusites, the Perizzites, the Amorites, the Philistines, all these different people groups. So I wanted to show one thing first, and so Rafa, if you are, I think you're on here, so here's what I'll first show you. I do have this video where I go through a lot of what happened in the Old Testament, and that people consider genocide. They say things like, you know, the God of the Hebrews is a genocidal madman. In fact, it is one of those atheist guys, one of those kooky atheist guys that says that all the time. I think he was the one who wrote The God Delusion. What's his name? Oh, let's see. The God Delusion. Y'all probably get it on there before I do, but Richard Dawkins, yeah. I think he's the one that said that God was literally a genocidal madman. But my video here, and it, I think, has chapters in it. So yeah, it's easy to get through. You can pop to different things. But you can see here just from my description on this, whoa, I go through a lot of things in the Old Testament that tell you about why God might have done those things. Okay, and you must start with the fact that in Genesis 6 and in many other texts, angels literally came down from heaven and mated with human women and caused a race of giants. And I don't even only want to say giants because so many other things happened during that time period according to many texts. Interbreeding with animals, cannibalism, you know, and the giants, and it's just so many crazy things happened during this time period in history. It's so long ago, by the way. We know so little from modern science about this time period. There's just not much modern science can give us in the way of help in this area. When they pull giant bones out of the earth, they tell us it's dinosaurs, right? So you have to ask yourself, do they really know what they're talking about? And I would contend that most of them don't. But the history of what we get from the ancient writings tells us a complete story of this interaction between angels and humans and the giants that lived upon the earth, along with many other beings and beasts and animals and weird things. And that the flood was a cleansing of the earth to render all of the corrupt flesh on earth, to destroy it. And so we understand that, but then we understand also, and this will be actually in this section of this video, the history of the giants and the ziggurats, because the ziggurats were built after the flood, and they continued the practice of mating virgins from each city or tribe at the top of the ziggurats with an angelic being to create more of this half human, half angel progeny. And in fact, there were historians at the time of Christ that wrote about that very thing, and I go into that in this video. So when you understand where these races came from, and then I also go into the Midianites and the Amalekites, and I talk about in the Bible the reasons why God had them wipe out those races. And it was because those races in many cases were either from the giant bloodlines, or they had already committed atrocities against God's own people by killing many of them. So you must ask yourself, in what way is that genocidal? If it's vengeance, if it's avenging of his people, if it's, disciplinary, there are so many reasons why God might have done those things, including the fact that these bloodlines were tainted by angel blood. So, from that perspective, if you know those things, then you know that maybe God wasn't so bad in doing those wars, in waging those wars against certain groups. Maybe there's a reason he didn't want anyone to be left. He didn't want anyone interbreeding with the women or raising the children of ancient angel bloodlines. Does that make sense? So when you understand the context, it makes a lot of sense. If you are oblivious to all that context, then you're going to think, well, I can't see how the Amalekites were bad at all. And why did God wipe them out, from the men to the women to the children and the animals? Does that make sense? Why would God wipe out the animals? Because many of the ancient texts tell us they also interbred with animals. So if you have that context, you're going to understand. And if you don't have that context, you won't understand. You'll just say, God's mean, I don't like him. And you can go in your safe space and cuddle your stuffed animals and pretend that God will never be just, and he's not holy, and he's not righteous, and he doesn't have to punish evil, but he does. He has to punish evil. And whether he does it on earth or he does it in the spiritual realm, he will punish evil. And so, Rafa, you have a response there. You say, I also read something about those people worshiping other gods and sacrificing their own children and burning them alive. They were wicked. Absolutely. And I think I do go into that stuff as well in this video. So I would recommend, if you are questioning this, that you take an hour and watch this video. It's got a ton of good information that I don't want to go over again on the live stream. So, I hear you, Lindsay Ball, and you say angels don't have sperm. And, I get it. Angels don't have, quote, sperm, according to you. But, to assume you know everything about how an angel could possibly impregnate or conceive with a woman is, I think, a little brash. It's a little brash. I know you reject a lot of anything that appears to come close to Gnostic thought, and the Gnostics did believe in the incursion of the angels, many of them, but that doesn't mean the incursion of the angels was a Gnostic legend. It wasn't. It was well before the time of the Gnostics. Well before the time of the Gnostics did people talk and write about the angel incursions. We have Dead Sea Scrolls from 600 years before Christ. That was before the Gnostics ever were a thing. Hundreds of years before the Gnostics came about. And so, the Dead Sea Scrolls has a fragment of Noah that says when Noah was born to Lamech, that Noah gleamed with light because he was so special, chosen by God, and that that Lamech thought Noah was of the angel bloodlines, and he went to kill his wife because of it. He thought she had essentially gotten impregnated by an angel. He was going to kill her. And then I think one of the prophets of the time, I can't remember if it was Methuselah or one of these others, told him, no, your son is chosen by God. That's why he gleams with light, and he is not of the angel progeny. So, if you want to ignore all those writings, you can do it. I think it's at your peril that you do. And so if you ignore all those writings and you don't have the context, you don't understand why God would have been so mean as to kill these races, then, maybe you think God's a mean God. And I would hate to stand before God after a life lived and then say to him, yeah, God, I thought you were the bad guy. When, all the people in the New Testament quoted that God and used verses out of the Old Testament that referred to that God specifically and said, yes, he's the Father of all. He's the one that sent the Redeemer. He's the one that sent the Word. So, so I think that's where we will go for now on that topic. I do encourage you to see this video that I made, The God of Genocides. I think it's a good one. It's got a lot of good information. That's all. So, Lindsay Ball, you say the book of Enoch says the angels corrupted their bodies. So how does that make sense? Well, it makes sense because in the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, there is a separate type of body for an angel and a different kind of body. It says flesh in that passage. There's a different type of flesh of angels and luminaries and humans. Everything has flesh, has bodies. They're just different types. Okay? So spiritual bodies exist too. So they corrupted their bodies by doing something they were not supposed to do with them. So that's what it's talking about there. Okay, so let me see here. I think we'll leave that one there because I just would encourage you to watch that video. If you don't have that context or you want to know my perspective, that's really it. And I think we've summarized that well. So I will go on to, let's see, get topics. Next topic. Thoughts about the North Pole. This is by Northbound Believer. Thank you for that. So let's get that on the screen. Thoughts on the North Pole. Okay, so because this is my thoughts, I'm going to take that off the screen. I'll give you my thoughts. So the North Pole to me is a bit of a mystery. It is a bit of a mystery. I know a lot of people have a lot of ideas about it. We talked about some of that on the live stream before. I think Come Alive, you brought up the Northern Lights and feeling like that was an apt demonstration of the, quote, rainbow, the green bow that sits around the throne of God. It could be. I think in that live stream I said the same thing that I'm going to say now, which is that I don't know for sure, but it's very amazing. The Northern Lights are amazing and beautiful. And that, I can't rule out that possibility, but to me, it felt like the bow around the throne of God that's green like the Northern Lights is more like something that's in heaven at his throne. And I don't believe that the Northern Lights are at that place. According to the writings I read about the structure of heaven, the landscape of heaven, that the throne of God would be much higher in heaven than the Northern Lights are. And so whether it's a reflection of that or some other spiritual phenomenon, which I would be apt to believe, I don't know. So we're talking about things that are very hard to know for sure. Very hard. I would be interested, maybe it would be an interesting study to see if there are more ancient texts that describe the Northern Lights and may have more context. Then maybe they give more of the ancient ideas of those things. I wish I had that. I don't have that at this point. But the Northern Pole, Lindsay, seen as it is, it does seem to be, now, I won't get into like the magnetic North Pole versus the real true North Pole or any of that stuff. But, the magnetic aspect of the North Pole is interesting, right? The fact that we can point compasses at the North Pole, that they stay aligned magnetically to that spot, doesn't that say something about the structure, perhaps, of our physical existence, of the creation itself? To me, that speaks to electromagnetic theory. And when we look at electromagnetic theory, we start seeing things about the way that when current is running, the way that an electromagnetic field is formed. And if you know much about that or studied it much, when there is electricity running through something, you get kind of a torus of a shape of electromagnetic field. I could bring that up, so let me do that. I'll bring up a visual of that really quickly. Because I know there's some really easy diagrams to show you what I'm talking about. But as you can see from here, this is what they tell us about the Earth's magnetic field right here, right? So, of course, that's the globe model, right? And so they assume that there is a magnetic field that is built around, in this shape, a torus shape, around the pole of the Earth. Now, the interesting thing is, to me, if we do the essentially flat Earth model, which one do I want to pick? I don't know. This is actually my favorite of them. This is a map that was also done, I believe, in the 1800s, but you can see that, I think, pretty well here. But the North Pole here, I think this is actually probably a pretty accurate representation of the structure of the land that we live on, and to some degree, not perfect, obviously. But this being the North Pole, if creation is such that God is running electricity through it, and that we have perhaps this electromagnetic field that runs essentially, let me see if I can do it here, out the North Pole, and it goes around, oops, my hand disappeared. It goes around like this as a torus, and it generates a field like this that I can't really, I hope you understand what I'm saying, but circularly from the North Pole out to the sides and down and under and back up. That would cause exactly what we see with compasses, and that is for them to always point to that north, because there's electricity that runs this universe. I think that actually in physics, in modern physics, we discount electromagnetic theory and the work of people like Nikola Tesla. We discount that work, and we have, in the past century, we've seen a propagandizing of gravity theory and all these other things that support a global model, right? A globe model, and the model of the universe that they want us to believe. So to me, that North Pole does have a specific purpose and reason in God's creation. And I don't think it's what they say it is. I don't see how a large mass body can just generate an electric field on its own. It doesn't make any sense. Of course, they say things like, oh, it's because the core is spinning at such and such heat, temperature, superheated core is spinning, and it generates a magnetic field inside the Earth. They can't prove any of that. They have no evidence of any of that. All they have is speculation, where they've made up what the core of our planet looks like, if there even is a core. And they use that to, again, perpetuate the model they have accepted in their heads. And so, to me, the North Pole definitely has a purpose. It's definitely amazing. It's a part of God's creation. It's a part of the way that this existence works. And so I guess, having said that, I can leave that. But I do believe that the physics of our planet and of our existence, I shouldn't say planet. Why did I say planet? But you know what I'm talking about. The physics of our world are based on electromagnetics and density or pressure. And it seems to be everything. It can explain everything we experience, from, what we call gravity to, falling and all that stuff. It's all explained with density. Boats float on water because water is more dense than the boats themselves, even though they can be heavier than the amount of displacement or all that. It has to do with density. Just like if you put a tube underwater, you blow air through the tube, then those air bubbles come up because they are less dense than the water they're in. And by the same token, we walk around on the land because we are more dense than the air, and we are less dense than the ground. So it's If you understand fluid physics, then you would understand all of this. It all makes sense. And so to me, the combination of fluid dynamics, density, and magnetism and electromagnetism, that's the rules by which our world works. All of it. There's no gravity. C. Jones, you said my hand disappeared like an astronaut's arm in the ISS. Yeah, here we go, C. Jones. Watch this. Magic. I'm on the ISS. Sorry. Yeah, I got videos we could watch, but I don't want to do that right now. Yeah, let's not talk about the ISS. But I will say this, Northbound, based on like my background here, this is one of those things I can't explain. I don't know how to explain. But just like I showed you, the way this map presents the North Pole with a stone, I can't remember. There was something I heard a long time ago about maybe a writing that talked about this place. Man, it's so hard to keep track of everything. I don't remember if it was like something out of the works of Marco Polo or some explorer. I can't remember, but it feels like I remember reading something about this landmass at the North Pole. And I would also say that probably, by the way, I would say probably whatever's represented on this map we're looking at from 1569 is probably the true North Pole. It's the magnetic North Pole and is the true North Pole. And that the one that our world tells us right now is the, quote, true North Pole is a farce, and it is to distract everyone from going to the real one and seeing what's there. I bet that's probably the case. So, yeah, I would. And, I'm saying words like, I bet that's the case. I think this. Just know that I'm making a lot of speculation here, but you see, as I do, there's a lot of evidence that is totally contrary to the things we're told in school and on TV and all that garbage. So, yeah, I hope that gives you my perspective. I don't have any real hard and fast beliefs or thoughts about what that is, but I do know it's intrinsic to the way God's world works and the way he created it. Probably may have something to do with that electromagnetism running through the earth itself, the way it was created. And so, you just posted me something good, Northbound. You said, I suspect Mount Meru could possibly be the mountain of God, sometimes referenced in scripture. The four rivers, the land masses, the origin of creation. Just some of my thoughts on it. Very interesting. Very interesting. So I guess like this map is showing, you're saying that the four rivers, the Euphrates, the Pishon, the Gishon, if I'm saying it right, Pishon, Gihon, and the Euphrates and Tigris were actually these four rivers in this map. And that, let's see. Yeah, I get you. And that the Garden of Eden was in the middle, maybe. I don't know. That would be interesting. I just don't know. I do know that when, for instance, like the book of Adam and Eve talks about when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, that there was a sea to the north of it, a pure sea, that if they had washed in it, they would have been cleared of their sins. It would have washed their sins away. So that and many other things still make me feel like the Garden of Eden was heavenly, maybe not in the highest realms of heaven. According to a few different writings, it sounds like it was in one of the lower areas of heaven, closer to the land. But you say Garden of Eden possibly on the landmass to the east of the mountain. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. I would love for you to, continue to vet those ideas, and if you find any information, I would love to see it. Again, like, man, I tell you, sometimes when I read some of the explorers' writings, like you read Marco Polo. Oh, I found something in Marco Polo the other day. What was it? Oh yeah, Marco Polo talking about dragons. he literally saw dragons and ran across people that talked to him about dragons and things like that. So there's just so many things like that that, man, I don't have time to study it all. Would love to. But by the way, dragons, I have found a treasure trove of information on ancient writings about dragons. And I will probably be doing a video soon on dragons because I love it. It's so cool. So, yeah. Superfluity, you say the most challenging things for you concerning the flat earth narrative, which I do believe, are the solar eclipse and southern star rotations. Yes. Yes, I think I've gone down some of that before. I'm trying to remember. I don't know that I came to conclusions on it because it's hard to know who to trust, isn't it? It's hard to know who to trust. I actually feel like I've gotten conflicting information on those things, solar eclipses and the southern stars, based on who I'm looking at, you know, and so it's really hard. You know, one of the things I tried to do when I was studying the stars was go and find amateurs. If you find amateurs that are taking photos or doing stuff with the stars and you look at their data, you don't trust like NASA's or anything like that. You know, you get off in that and you'll not know what you're looking at because they lie all the time. So yeah, I don't know. I get you. I get you. Yeah. So April, you asked that I would share what I know from Marco Polo. You bought the book but haven't read it. Oh. I'm just going to mention it real quick. There's a website, and I'll get it really quick and let you guys know where I found the information that I'm talking about. Oops. There we go. GenesisPark.com. That is the website where I found it. Now, there's a lot of stuff on that site, and it's actually related to dinosaurs. Their intent on that site, and I put it in the chat, their intent is to prove that, quote, dinosaurs walked with men, because that helps the, of course, young earth creationist theory, and I think that's the whole point of that website. But they have a specific page on dragons, and it is incredible. That's what I was talking about. It's like a treasure trove of information, and Marco Polo's included, plus, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens of other ancient writings and stories, people talking about dragons. So that's it. You got it, April. But I would suggest, April, you read the book, because Marco Polo's stuff is unbelievable. I mean, it's like better than any movie you'd seen. It's so cool. So, okay. Anyway, I think that's what we'll do on the North Pole today. We'll move on then. Okay, let's see. Let's see here. Next will be Rafa Sieber's topic of CIA and the book of Adam and Eve. So now I know that the CIA will be watching this video, and I'll be careful about what we talk about from here on out. Oh, yeah. So this was mentioned last week. Let me put this on the screen. Let me make sure it's on the screen first. All right. And I don't know how many of you know about this. I don't know how many of you know about this topic at all, but it's a really interesting topic. And Rafa, I'm glad you mentioned it. So actually, I got to bring that back up because I put my notes on here. So this is what, Rafa, you said last week. You read something in 2nd Esdras when the angel tells Ezra something like, the world must start again. And you related it with a CIA classified document, or declassified document, called the Book of Adam and Eve of Recurring Apocalypses. Yes. And so when you said that, I have seen this thing in the CIA documents, in their vault. And so I do know what this is. I had to go back and refresh myself on it. But it's very interesting. So I tried to find in 2nd Esdras where it might be talking about that you were talking about. And I think this might be the verse. But in 2nd Esdras 7:75 is this verse. And by the way, I want to say this verse in 2nd Esdras. Now, I think, oops, what did I do? There we go. So if you guys will pause for a second and listen to this, because this is from last live stream, when we talked about the reading plan I gave you with all the different writings, and 2nd Esdras is in there. It's one of them. Now, this is one of those things that's like so hard to keep track of, but 2nd Esdras has a portion of verses, about, I think it's 30 verses in chapter 7, that are actually left out in some translations, and others include those verses. And those verses talk about life after death and what happens after a person dies. It's very interesting. I suggest you find the version. And that's what I was going to say is, like, last week and on my website, the link I have to 2nd Esdras, I don't remember if it has all of the verses or if it left those out. I would recommend reading the version that has those verses in it. It's about 30 or 40 verses that some versions just left out. But this is from that section. And so it says in verse 75 of 2nd Esdras 7, it says, I answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, show this also to your servant, whether after death, as soon as every one of us yields up the soul, we shall be kept in rest until those times come when you will renew the creation, or whether we shall be tormented at once. So this is Ezra asking an angel about, I believe it's the angel. I don't think it's actually God or Jesus, but I don't remember from the context. He asking about death and what happens right after you die. Do you give up your soul, or are you kept in rest and all that? But he mentions this time when God would renew the creation. God would renew the creation. And so Rafa Sieber asked this about the CIA book, because this CIA book, it's called the Adam and Eve story, is what it's actually called, not the book of Adam and Eve. And it is at this location. So we're going to go to the CIA's reading room, and we're going to look at that document real quick. Thanks, CIA, for declassifying this. All right. And here it is. So this is literally on CIA.gov. You can go search for it if you want. But this book is written by a man named Chan Thomas. It's from 1966. Now, you know, it's interesting. Well, the contents of this thing include, it's not what you think. It has barely anything to do with Adam and Eve. You can see here on page 2, it's got the core of the earth and what someone thinks is the cross-section of the earth, the globe, the mantle, inner core, outer core, blah, blah, blah. And then it starts into this essay, the passions and perils of nationhood, all this stuff. It talks about lots of things. I think this is Henry Kissinger, blah, blah, blah. But it's talking about, I think it's going into political details about nations rising and falling and changes in the earth. And it then brings up information about the idea that, as we come way down, it's a lot of pages, but you can see now in the contents of the book itself, where it starts, it's talking about cataclysms and the great floods in history and the story and the event that they think is coming, this person thinks is coming in the future from 1966. And then talks about Genesis a little bit and then gives a conclusion. But this book is all about this idea that, and you can see here, you know, he thinks Noah's cataclysm and Adam and Eve had a cataclysm at 11,500 years prior, and that again in the future there will be another cataclysm. So this idea of a cyclical nature of the world, where it is, you know, there's a cataclysm, it's like a death and a rebirth, and a death and a rebirth. It's essentially reincarnation of the whole creation. Now, Lindsay Ball, you are hype on the Gnostic stuff. This is a completely Gnostic and esoteric idea, that the physical creation is destroyed and recreated and destroyed and recreated again and again and again and again and again. Uh, there's a book. Mm, this book by Madam H.P. Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine. So I have this book and I've read it. I've read it cover to cover. Her doctrine, so to speak, includes this idea of the cataclysm and recreation of the earth over and over and over through history. She saw, like, in this writing, there's talk about 6 different ages of men, and this was 5 or so of these were before Adam and Eve. So she sees this death, birth, recreation of the whole planet again and again and again. And of course, she does believe in globe theory and all that. And so this idea of the death, the cataclysm of the known reality and the rebirth of it again and again, it is Gnostic. Like, if you know the Gnostic doctrine, there's the archons and all this stuff, and there's the what do they call it? What does Blavatsky call it? Something like the esoteric egg theory. That, like, the universe is an egg. Everything's a sphere to these people, by the way. Maybe after we continue to talk about these things, you started to realize everything's a sphere. From the Greek philosophers forward, everything was a sphere. And in fact, I'm starting to learn the Egyptians talked about spheres too. And so there's this esoteric or spiritual egg that is the cosmos. It's the rebirth of this egg, this spiritual egg, every so many eons or something. And this is all part of this esoteric Gnostic doctrine. And so this CIA document, to me, let me get all this flat Earth nonsense out of here. Silly stuff. But this is what this book is all about. I read most of this book, actually, on this website. And it was all that. It was very modern scientific. It was all these different proofs with modern science and theory and globe stuff and all this. And I just felt like this was more of the scientific nonsense we've been going through since Darwin and Einstein and all of that. You know, it's just more of the same. Now, the question may arise in your head, like, why was it classified in the first place? Why would it have been classified and then finally declassified? Well, there's a lot of reasons that could be. I might get myself in trouble for saying some of the things I'm about to say, but I believe full and wholeheartedly, based on some whistleblower testimony and other things, that the government, the deep government, has known for a long time that there's a cataclysm coming. They know about as much as this about that. But I believe from my study in the scriptures and everything that what we're really talking about is the end of this material existence, the end. Now, you may agree or disagree. I don't care really. But you must understand that the government, from what I can tell, truly believes there's a cataclysm coming. And they probably held this book because it spoke of that. It gave them scientific reasoning that they could use to discuss it. And they kept it from the public because they don't want the public to know about this coming cataclysm. And I believe that that's very wrapped up, that cataclysm knowledge, it's very wrapped up in the whole UFO propaganda, alien propaganda, all of it. And I mean, for one, I hope you know, and I've even seen very recently, they're still building underground dwellings for these rich people. Rich people are spending untold amounts of money to build underground shelter at this point in time. Apart from all the underground bases and things that exist around the world, there's underground cities in some parts of the world. I think, isn't there one in North Carolina or Raleigh or something like that? anyway, I mean, why would they be building all those things if they don't believe there's any cataclysm coming? Of course they believe there's a cataclysm coming. They don't want to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about that, right? But they were willing to put all of their fortune into building underground living facilities so that they could avoid it. That's the big thing at the end of all of this that, people don't like to hear. But I believe that's why this was classified. And I think it was declassified because they figured no one would even pay attention to it at this point. I don't think it's all truth. I think in no regard is this document all truth, but it is interesting. It's interesting. It tells you what they were thinking. It, gives you ideas on, things like that. So if you're interested in this, it's not about Adam and Eve. It's about the destruction of the earth or a cataclysmic, thing that might happen in the future. That's what it's all about. So I don't know. Northbound, you say they know what's coming, but they will not be able to hide from the fire of God when the fullness of time has finally come. I can't even add to or take away from that. I love that. I think it's great. And I agree with you. And then some people on this live stream will not agree with that. And I'm okay with that. You don't have to agree with it. I'm not scared by it. I don't fearmonger on my channel about that, but I do believe it's true. I don't think it's really something to be scared of. We're all going to die one way or another. It's just, it kind of would be cool if it was at God's hand instead of someone else's. So I don't know. To me, I don't know. All right. So I think that may answer your question, Rafa. I hope so. I'm looking at your comment, Rafa, about that. You said, what do I think about the book? I think I kind of said that. The original writings and symbols of the creation story as they are in the book. That's the verse. Couldn't find it myself. Okay, cool. So we got there. I think we got there, Rafa. I appreciate that question. I thought it's a really interesting thing. And you're mentioning now the Naga glyphs from page 26. Let me go to that. Page 11. Let's look at the Naga glyphs. 26, 24, 25, 26. The significant Naga glyphs, it says here. I think y'all can see that. I guess it's not going to give us a picture of them, is it? That'd be cool. By Ezra, through Moses' direct reading are cherubim, man, fruit, rib, woman, serpent, Adam's sleep, tree, flaming sword. Our knowledge of Naga glyphs tells us that the tree of life symbolized a mother continent, a parent civilization lasting thousands of years longer than ours today. An unadorned serpent represented water or the ocean, a serpent entwined about the tree. You know what that is? I mean, I don't know. I don't have time to go into all of these because it's long. There's a lot here. If y'all are interested in this, I suggest you go and read it. There's a lot here. But as soon as it says there's a serpent around a tree and that signifies in some way the creation, that to me, it sounds like Gnostic tripe. Those symbols were made by the Catholic Church. Those symbols, the ancient texts don't talk about a serpent wrapped around a tree. Do you see why it's all suspect. This is all very suspect. And to me, it reminds me more of like Zachariah Stitchin's work than anything I could really trust. Okay. So I didn't spend a ton of time picking this apart. It was a writing from a guy in 1970 or 66. So this is not like we're looking at some ancient text that's important. This is just someone's ideas. So if you want to read it in that, understanding this is someone's ideas about these things, great. So he is taking a very allegorical interpretation of Genesis, as many of these people do. So I just, anyway. Rafa, you ask what's the oldest form or older form of Genesis that I know of? Is it Paleo-Hebrew, you ask? if I wanted to find the oldest copy of Genesis that I could, I would start with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's probably in Hebrew, and there might be some copies in Aramaic in there as well. But that's about as good as you're going to get. The Paleo Hebrew, it's so old, it's like we only usually can find very fragmented pieces of stones that had Paleo Hebrew on it. So we know how to read it, we know it was Hebrew, but as far as having full copies of anything in Paleo Hebrew, we don't have it, I don't think. This might be something I could study further. So, cool. Well, like I said, that's a really cool topic. Let's go on to our next topic. Let me see here. Okay, so C. Jones, this is you. Let me see if I can get this on the screen correctly so it doesn't chop it off or something. Too big? There we go. I'll change it to that. Now it fits, but we'll go to your verses. Excuse me. Your verses of 1 Timothy 6:16. Let's go there first. Here we go. All right. Sorry, getting my stuff fixed up here. 2 Timothy 6:16. Okay. First Timothy 6:16. I think I said second. Okay, 1 Timothy. Here we go. 6:16. Okay, so it says here in 16 of 1 Timothy 6, who only hath immortality. Okay, only hath immortality. I'm trying to get my screen set up. Sorry, guys. There we go. It's too big. I'm trying to make it fit and be big enough for you guys to read. And I get tripped up sometimes trying to get everything set. There we go. All right, so to know the who, I'm going to go back to the verse 14 and read forward. So, that thou keep this commandment without spot, unrebukable, until the appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ, which in his times he shall show, who is the blessed and only potentate, King of kings, Lord of lords, who only hath immortality, dwelling in the light, which no man can approach unto, whom no man hath seen nor can see, to whom be honor and power everlasting. Okay, so that is talking about Christ and who he is. He came from the light. He is immortal. He will never die. And so this is good. This says, yes, like what you said, he dwelt in the light with God, right? That's where he was before he made himself of no what does it say? He made himself like man, right? And came down. Okay, so that's the first verse. Now let's check the next verse. So that would be Psalm 97:2. So let's go to 97:2. Psalms 97, verse 2. Clouds and darkness are round about him. Righteousness and judgment are the habitation of his throne. Interesting. It says, the Lord reigneth, let the earth rejoice. Let the multitude of isles be glad thereof. Clouds and darkness are around him. Righteousness and judgment are the habitation of his throne. Fire goes before him and burns up his enemies round about. His lightnings enlighten the world. The earth saw and trembled. The hills melt like wax. The heavens declare his righteousness. Interesting. Yeah, clouds and darkness are around him. That's interesting. I'm going to look at the Hebrew briefly just to make sure there's nothing there that we need to know about. Clouds and darkness. Wa'arapel, which is cloud or heavy cloud. Darkness, gross darkness, thick darkness. So that's like... interesting. They surround him. Well, I mean, so C. Jones, I I don't know. I mean, let's just go ahead and read the next passage too before we start making any conclusions. So let's go ahead and do the final passage. What was that? 1 Kings 8:12. Let's do that. So 1 Kings 8. Well, that's 9. 1 Kings 8, verse 12. Then spake Solomon, the Lord said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. I have surely built thee an house to dwell in, and a settled place for thee to abide in forever. The king turned his face about and blessed all the congregation. So this is Solomon comparing God's place of existence as thick darkness and saying, I've provided you a place to dwell, Lord, my temple, which is, of course, beautiful, bright, had gold, all these things. I feel like, C. Jones, I get what you're saying, but I don't feel like it's a real conflict. I feel like it's just a descriptive, and I think it's all true. I don't think there's any problem here. So I guess what I would say to this is that, we have other passages like, I'm thinking of Revelation 21, where it talks about the city, the New Jerusalem, and the temple, that Christ is the temple thereof, and that he and the Father are the light. They are the light inside it. They're what lights it up because of their brightness. So I think that the way I feel about this is that, yes, God is light, and he is unapproachable. And we know that he's unapproachable because, like, for instance, Moses was not allowed to see his face or he would die. He's unapproachable. And that is echoed in other places with other people too. Because of his light, the glory is so bright, it's so magnificent, it beams through you, it would destroy your physical body. There's no way you could be in front of it. And so when I hear the passages saying he exists in unapproachable light, that to me is a statement about the nature of God and Christ themselves. Of course, Christ being begotten of the Father, he's much like the Father, right? Of course he would be. So that's the way I guess I see those things, is yes, unapproachable light. And the darkness now, that actually reminds me of Genesis, the state of creation or of existence for God before creation. Do you remember like the chaos, the chaotic waters, and the Spirit moved upon the face of those waters? This is all before the water, like oceans and stuff, existed. This is primordial waters, so to speak. This is before creation, what was there. And it was apparently chaotic or dark. And that to me is what I think of when I'm thinking about the darkness and the cloud surrounding the Father in heaven, that although he is unapproachable in his light, that he is surrounded then, though, by chaos. I mean, I don't want to say chaos. God is not chaotic, but do you know what I'm saying? Like, the lack of existence of anything around him is possibly that thick cloud, that thick darkness. And how else would they describe that? I mean, how do you describe some of the things we're talking about? I'm not doing a good job. That's why I'm stumbling over my words. It's because we can't even imagine those things, let alone describe them with our languages. So I don't know. Does that make any sense? It makes sense in my brain. You say, C. Jones, I guess I wrestle with God being in unapproachable light, yet dwelling in thick darkness. And Moses went to the mountain, and it was thick darkness there. Huh. Interesting. Yeah. All I can say, I think, is what I kind of said. So Exodus 20:21. I'll bring that up real quick. I'm just curious. Probably everybody is. So Exodus 20. Come on. Exodus 20:21. Yes, Moses said to the people, "Fear not, for God has come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not." And the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. Oh, well, the thing is, that word darkness, there, C. Jones, that word darkness is actually not exactly just darkness. You see, it's clouds, heavy cloud. Like, so I don't know what to say other than I would assume that in that case, it could have meant darkness, but it could also just mean cloud. That when he came, he was clouded, because if they had seen him, they would die. So perhaps he had to veil himself in clouds so that they wouldn't die when they go. When Moses goes up there, he doesn't die. He hides himself. So I think that seems like a good explanation. I mean, I'm, speculating just as you would. But I think that'll do for now on that. I just don't have any more to say about it, really. I think that's pretty good. So what else did we have? What time are we? We're about an hour and 10 minutes in. So what else did we have? We had Francis Howard, and I wanted to get to yours because you were pretty new. I don't know if I've seen you before, so I will put yours on. Francis Howard. In John chapter 4, are we stuck to a specific place of worship? John 4, specific place of worship. And when you say this, I'm not sure what's in John 4, but it reminds me of the story of the Samaritan woman, the woman at the well. Because Jesus says to her, there's coming a time, not when people will come to the mountain to worship, but when they will worship in spirit and truth. I don't know if that's the passage. Maybe it is, but let's find out. So, John chapter 4. What did God say here about place of worship? John chapter 4. Oh, shoot. I'm in the wrong view. All right, John 4. Yep, it's Samaritan woman. I knew it. All right. I'm glad I know the Bible pretty good. It would be embarrassing if I made that mistake. Yeah, the Samaritan woman. So I just want to go to the part where he says to her, yes, the woman says, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet," to Jesus Christ himself. Let me put that on the screen. Here we go. Yes. All right. Jesus says to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour comes when neither shall you in this mountain or at Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you know not." We know what we worship, though. And he, by we, I think means the Jews, because he says, for salvation is of the Jews. This word "of," by the way, can mean from or out of. And that's really what it does mean. If I click on it here, go to Strong's, it means from. So the salvation that God provides came out of the Jewish nation. So saying this is not saying anything against any Gentile. It's not saying that only Jews are saved, which of course the Israel-only crowd will always tell you only the Jews were saved. Which is totally wrong, because they mistranslate things like this word, which, he's saying salvation is coming out of the Jewish nation for all nations. He says, you worship what you know not. Salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. So beautiful. And the Father seeks such to worship him, the ones that worship in their spirit and in truth. Not with a building, not with a place, not because of a set of laws. To me, that's the power here. That's what he's saying. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And the woman said, I know that Messiah's come. The Messiah, the way she says it here is weird in English. The woman says, I know that the Messiah's coming, and he's called Christ. Christ is a word that means sacrifice or Messiah, anointed one. When he is come, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I tell you, I am he. So this exchange is a beautiful exchange. It's actually, I love it. It's one of my favorites. Um, but I think it's very clear. So I think, Francis, to me, this does say, yes, there's no temple required. You don't have to go to the temple. Jesus is just now saying, he's like, you got to worship in spirit and truth, and that's what really matters. And then, of course, we know what happened just a few years later, 40 years or so later. God destroyed the Jewish temple. He allowed it to be destroyed. I believe it was through his intervention and work that it was destroyed. And so the temple itself was destroyed to the ground, leveled, burnt, everything. And so, from a perspective that might say, yeah, no, they're going to rebuild a temple. The temple is important still. From a perspective that might say, no, the temple is an important piece, and that's not going away, especially for the Jews. That perspective, I think, is a little ignorant of the fact that God destroyed the temple himself. He stopped all of the sacrifices. He stopped, in essence, he stopped all of the law, all of the Old Testament law at that point. And he talked about this over and over again. Jesus was like, I'm going to fulfill the law. I am the end of the law. I'm the completion of it. It's going to be over. And he says this to this lady, there's going to come a time when you Samaritans aren't going to worship in your holy mountain, and neither are the Jews going to worship in Jerusalem. He's talking about the Jewish nation being important because salvation comes from that, comes out of it. But then in the end, no, that temple is not important. The mountain of the Samaritans, which I think they said, what was it, Mount Moriah or something? They said it was the mountain where Isaac was sacrificed, I believe. And that was their holy mountain. And this was the arguments between the Jews and the Samaritans and all that stuff. So, that was important to her, that holy mountain. But he's like, nope, we're not even going to worship there. It's going to be about spirit and truth. And so I think it's very clear. And yes, I like what you said, Laura, or who was it? No, Cornelius. You said, can you imagine her expression after Jesus said that? Yeah, it was confusion. Or after he said that I am the Messiah, she probably was jaw hit the floor, and she said, well, that makes sense since you just told me everything about my life and that I, was essentially in adultery and all this other stuff that he told her. And then he talks about this idea that the holy places, and there's all that talk in the prophecies about him bringing down the holy places, tearing down the holy places. And it, I don't know, it's just interesting to think about. All those puzzle pieces always fit together when we read these passages, to me. I mean, it's amazing, in the past, how did I miss this stuff, Laura, I like you're talking about faith, and C. Jones talking about faith. Yeah, it's about the inside. It's about the inside, and it always was about the inside, and it was about faith and truth and spirit. And it always was because, Hebrews talks about the temple and all that being patterns of the spiritual. So it was always the same. It's just that there was confusion on the part of the people that were steeped in those religions as to whether they really had a relationship with God or they had a relationship to the implements of worship, the places, the laws, and all this. And of course, you see the Pharisees that were so steeped in the law that they couldn't see God. They didn't know God. They were the generation of vipers. They were the synagogue of Satan. And so I think that makes it pretty clear there. But yeah, great passage. Absolutely beautiful passage. Thank you, Francis. Is it Francis Harvey? Or Howard. Francis Howard. Thank you for joining us and bringing that topic this morning. So great. Love it. Absolutely. All right. So Stephen Capaldo, if you're still on, I will do this very quickly. We're coming up on time. I usually finish after about an hour and a half. I don't like going too much further, but we'll put this on for now and do it. I'll just give you my thoughts so that you hear my viewpoint, and then if we want to go further in the future, we can do that. I think it's a very important topic to talk about. Divorce and remarriage. Yeah. So I'm going to take down all the scriptures for now. If we want to dig into scriptures another time, we will on this topic. But I think divorce and remarriage is a very important one. So, we do know from the scriptures that God allowed divorce in certain circumstances. He allowed it. It wasn't his intention to have divorce, right? And it's pretty clear that the intent was for marriage to last until death. And that the concession he made for divorce in the case of adultery was because, as he said, the weakness of the people. So I'll give you my opinion on divorce and remarriage. And don't take this as like me saying, if you don't do these things, you're going to hell. I'm not saying anything like that. My opinion and my ideas on what was taught in the scriptures and what was taught by Christ and all the other writings we have is that God had always intended for marriage to be lifelong. From the moment you physically joined yourself to a woman or woman to a man, I believe personally that the physical bond was true marriage, and that was what was always mentioned. Marrying, the word marry means joining together, and it does mean a physical joining. And that actually, when you read the law, seems to be what is always pointed at, as the marriage, the joining of two people. And then, of course, anything outside of that, joining then a woman to another person, that's adultery. A man to another woman, that's adultery. So we can go into that another time. I think I've talked about that before, but so I think that marriage was meant to last a lifetime until you're dead. And that the concession given for divorce and remarriage was, again, because of the weakness of humanity. But, I think God understands that in the case of an adultery, that is the end of that is essentially, and from the prophecies in the Old Testament, when he talks about Israel as an adulteress, as a harlot, that was to him a cardinal sin, like a big deal. And that was a revocation. It's like a rejection for Israel of God's leadership. It was a rejection of him as the head of that nation. And so just as for a woman to go against her husband and marry or join herself to another man, that is a rejection of his headship in their home as their family, of the relationship, and the position that they both share in a marriage because of what God had ordained. So because I think of that, it's like this outright rejection of the institution of marriage by God. I think that's why he allowed for it, because just as God with the nation of Israel had to judge them, and he judged them harshly in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple and their way of worship and all of that, and in my opinion, the destruction of the nation in general, that to me was a very clear picture of his hatred for the abomination of adultery. And so I think the best thing, so in an ideal world, if a man and a woman are married and one of them goes off and has adultery with some other person outside the marriage, I think the best thing, the thing that God wishes could happen with those people, is that the person would return to their original spouse and mend the relationship and rebuild to a place of holiness. I believe that is what God wants. I believe that it's okay, according to him and the law and everything else, not that we follow the law, but it sounds like, the concession was made in general for adultery to be a break of a marriage, and that can be, done away with, and then a new marriage put in its place. Because I guess maybe in a way, both things kind of represent God. Both things kind of represent God in the sense that if you think about remarriage, God had to break all the things about the nation of Israel that occurred, and then he brought in the church, the Gentile nations, as a part, almost like a new marriage. But of course, the Jews who believed in him were included in that. I think I'm not saying God said all those things and made the concessions for divorce and remarriage because of that, but it kind of makes sense that he would allow that. But I do still think the best thing is to try to mend a broken marriage. And it's not easy. It's probably one of the hardest things I can imagine. I'm just glad that my marriage has been stable and that we have not had to do anything like that. And, we both kept ourselves pure and obviously, and it's just a blessing. It's a blessing. And I want it to always be that way. So that's what I would say. Now, again, this is the other thing to this. Now, if you're in a relationship, let's say you didn't know all this, or you made a mistake. Let's say you're in a third marriage or a fourth marriage or something like that. If you're asking me if my opinion is that you should leave your current spouse and go back to your original spouse and mend the relationship, I am not saying that. We have all grown up in a world that has essentially tried to teach us that a marriage is like a car. If you get tired of it, if it starts to, not run as good as it used to, if, it gets rusty, it's not quite as beautiful as it used to be, you can trade that sucker in for a new one, right? And marriages are treated about like cars these days. You get the brightest, shiniest one you can and drive it until the wheels fall off, and then you can just switch it in for a new one whenever you want. And that's a real sad thing. So many of us, even listening to this call, may be in a situation that, ideally you would rather have not been in, and maybe your understanding has changed. You realize, man, I sure made some wrong decisions back in the past. I don't think that God's solution to that is for you to destroy the lives of the people in your current family, in your current relationships, and try to barge in on the lives of the people that you left in your past. So I don't think that's what God wants us to do. I think better for us would be at the point of understanding, oh man, I did make some mistakes. I just shouldn't have done that. Maybe there's some apologies to be made. Maybe, to an original spouse or something like that. But you have a spouse now that is dependent on you, and you want that to be righteous and you want that to be holy. So for you to go back on that would not be the right decision, I don't believe. What I believe to be the best course of action is to redeem what you have, what you've been given. You take it and you make the best of it that you can absolutely make. And you redeem it before God. Northbound, you're mentioning the book of Hosea. And that's a perfect mention because God tells Hosea, go marry the harlot and redeem her. So God is a God of redemption. And so to be in a current situation that may have not been ideal in the past, but then to be able to continue forward and redeem that's the work of God. To me, that's the work of God, is starting from where you are and redeeming everyone in your path, including yourself and your spouse and your children, and doing your best to do the work of God here on earth. And that to me is what that would be. It wouldn't be going back to a prior relationship, one that's probably changed and moved on, and then tearing that up and tearing up your relationship just to try to stay in accordance with some, what we might want to say, in accordance with some law, right? Instead, it sounds like the right thing to do instead is redeeming your current situation and making it as good a picture of what God is as possible. And to me, that's true redemption. That's through holiness and righteousness and doing the best with what you currently have. And not letting that relationship fall into the same chaos that maybe an original one did. So to me, that feels like the right approach. I'm not going to tell you I know everything about this topic because, like I said, I haven't been divorced and remarried. Praise God. I've like I said, but many of you have. And so, Stacia, I see you're saying that you were divorced and remarried. Your husband was a drug addict and he had an affair on you. But when you have nothing left and you cry out to Jesus, he will heal and restore. And we are proof of his grace and goodness. Very good. I'm really happy that you are in such a better situation now. And yeah, that's the type of thing. Like, and Stacia, I know more about you personally too, and I'm just thinking about what a blessing your life is now. You have so much, and you want that to be redeemed. You want to work on what God has given you. You don't want to go back. I mean, perhaps there's some relationship with your ex-husband, and I'm not saying there is, but perhaps in which he could be redeemed as well. But you cannot reject your current family, and you can't do all that to go back and try to. That would be incorrect. It wouldn't work right. Wouldn't be right. We want to redeem the things that he has blessed us with. And I know your situation more so than you're explaining, and I know you're in a good situation, so I'm excited about that. So I don't know, that was a lot of talking, a lot of blabbering, but that's my opinions on the subject. So and so I appreciate the question. It's a topic that I do like talking about. It's so pertinent to people, and thank you the interpreter Stephen Capaldo for bringing that topic to us. So I think with that, we probably sew it up for the day, guys. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. Laura Masood, you asked me about the coronation. I watched some of that. I mean, I've just seen little snippets of the coronation. It's such a weird practice. It's so, to me, sacrilegious and wrong. I mean, I have lots of thoughts about, the timing of it, what might be happening. The fact that people saw that hooded figure walk through the back with the staff, they called him the Grim Reaper. Did you see that? So funny, but yeah, I don't know. The symbolism, like you're saying, verum venemus, it's so wrong. Everything's so bad. Just the whole idea of kings, kings and monarchies, aside from God, is not, I don't know, it doesn't sit right with me. So men try to heap unto themselves worship when it should be due to God. So guys, thank you so much for your time this morning. I've had a blast. We did a ton of topics, and they were good. They were fun. We hit the CIA, we hit the North Pole, and FE, and John chapter 4, and oh man, so many good things. Divorce and remarriage. You guys are awesome. So thank you so much for your time, and let's pray again. It sounds like Come Alive had to jump off, but he is doing chemotherapy. It's a very dangerous type of therapy, so let's pray for him that he has the strength to make it through, and that it works, that it does something good for him. So thank you guys so much, and God bless you all this week. Feel free to reach out to me, email, or on my website, my contact form. Just want to mention that again. I am still doing some interview work, and you're welcome if you have some kind of information in your history or a testimony you'd like to give me. I would love to do a video on that. And then again, I'm still available, and we can schedule if you are in need or want to have me do a speaking engagement with you or your church or your Bible study group. I'd be happy to do that. So please feel free to reach out to me on any of those topics. Or if you just have another topic or a video you'd like to see me do. I've had a very busy month or so here, and this week was no different. But I think some of that slowing down, I'll be able to get back and start some videos again and keep going. Um, keep pumping out some good research and content for you guys. So let me know if you have any other ideas, and God bless you. Take care.